So welcome everybody. I just realized how much I missed last week's Friday session and how much these Friday sessions have been wonderful to, to kind of look a bit at the week and with each other in terms of what is coming out for us as we go through this journey together. And so here we are, and it's the last Friday session. And I kind of feel a bit of the weight of that word, the last, or, Ellen today mentioned something about closing and the weight of closing. And yeah, this doesn't feel like that. So we have something interesting things to share, and not only as the hosting team, because it also feels the summit has been a transformative space in the sense of us also getting more place in terms of participants, participating in some live sessions, and participants taking the role of hosts. And so we kind of subverted that habitual way of looking at these things and entering the space of co-creation, which is really something that we have been celebrating a lot in the team and was part of our intention. So we started this journey with an opening stage of grounding and inviting people to think how to get ready to embark on a difficult topic and challenge ourselves on the way. And then we moved to falling apart, so looking at the difficult things that persist in us and around us that keep us stuck in patterns that create results nobody wants and causes pain and suffering and all those things we would like to avoid, and really looking at our role in it, not to say this is something external that is problematic, but actually that we have a stake and we are part of co-creating what is happening around us and in our lives. And then the invitation was to look at new ways of, or different ways of looking at conflict and the living process that could help us start to have a different perspective about it. And finally, we had this stage we are in of looking at practices of kind of seeding the future, looking at what are the things that we can do or continue to do and strengthen that kind of strengthen our muscles to deal with these difficult situations, difficult moments in our lives. And so our intention from the beginning, when we brought the topic of conflict transformation at the center, was really to kind of look in and start to embrace the idea that conflict is part of life, of nature, is not something good or bad, is something that disrupts the habitual ways, that calls for something is kind of signaling a change. And so we wanted to really invite all of us to kind of get on that journey of if we kind of start to look in that way to conflict and start to open up to this idea of it as part of any living process, then what kind of gestures or what kind of ways we can engage with it when it happens that can be more generative and healthy for us and for the cultures we are in, instead of what is the habitual way that is something that drains energy, that breaks us apart and somehow diminishes or destroys our efforts for a meaningful change. And I want to bring this back also to the idea of the coming down to earth, as we wanted to invite all of us to really sense that these are times where human being is asked to decenter himself, him or herself, and occupy the rightful place in nature among other living creatures and the natural world, which has an intrinsic value in itself and with which we collaborate, which have agency beyond us. So it's not like we are the only beings with agency. So we live in a living world that is unfolding all the time. And we are not fixed, we are not static beings. We are much more the movement in our lives than a fixed, rigid idea of identity or whatever. So if we start to consider all these things and looking at the phenomenon of conflict, we wanted to offer this journey as a way to delve into that and explore that. And here we are, and it's the fourth stage. Basically, next stage is going to be about looking ahead, looking at both the journey and the head, and like how we cross this threshold of the summit coming to an end, and what is coming after, what is moving through us that wants to kind of grow from this experience. And so today is a really great moment for us to tune in to what have we been exploring through the summit, and particularly this stage, this fourth stage, that we think that is really useful in terms of both insights and of practices, of practical things we can do within ourselves in our daily lives that can help us move forward, and move forward in a way that have our gardens flourish with life, with possibilities, with potential. So we would like to invite you to start off the session today with a 10 minutes journaling. We're going to share some music. If you want to listen to it, if you don't want to listen to it, you can just take the sound off. And for 10 minutes, we would like to invite you to do some journaling with the question of how does my garden grow, and how I would like it to continue to grow. And when I say my garden, I ask you to think about my garden in terms of yourselves, but also, you know, the work you're doing, the people with whom you engage, so your context, your life. So that you can take this question of the garden, of the metaphor, in these different levels. And just think, like looking at the summit's journey and looking at this fourth stage of practices, things, ideas, ways of doing, ways of embodied practices, different ways of doing and being that can help your garden to grow, to continue growing. Is that clear? A prompt. Yeah, the idea is to be open, but if you feel the need for some clarification, I would be open to help you with that. But it's really to leave that a bit wide and open for all the possibilities for your reflections. Okay, fantastic. Alex, you just arrived. Did you got the invitation for the journaling now? Yeah? Okay, great. So let's do 10 minutes now. I'll share the music. Yeah. Try to come to a close. And we would like to invite us all to do an exercise, a collective exercise, before we go into breakout rooms. And it's a bit of a closing the circle somehow, because on the first gathering we made on the first Friday, we created a collective altar together. I don't know, some of you might recall, using something called a Jamboard. And we would like to invite us all to do another altar today, an altar to practices, to things that sustain us and sustain and give life to our gardens. And so I'm going to share a link on the chat box. We'd like to invite you all to open up the link in your computer. And if you can, please put one of those yellow hands on your screen saying that you've just done it, you have it open, or let me know if you're having some difficulties in opening it. Yeah, Ruju, you can open your mic and tell us your question.
That's Shanti.
Hi, it's Shanti. Hey. No, there was okay. Yeah, so it means it's good. All right, so I'm going to put another music and we're going to do this in two parts. So the first part, the first 5 minutes is just make the altar together. And we want to make an altar as it's written there on the theme. It's an altar to practice, to how my garden grows. And perhaps it's good, instead of trying all to go there immediately, one thing is it's good if you make a search on images and text, different things you want to put there, and kind of put it open on your computer, so that then on the second part, on the, like after 2 or 3 minutes, you are in a place where you can start to put them, and then you can also put them accordingly to what others are putting. So you can try to co-create together. It's going to be a bit chaotic, but I'm sure if we trust in this process that something collective will emerge that kind of intertwines, and it is not just a collage of things, but that we can actually kind of work with each other. There's going to be different pages on the Jamboard, so you can move forward. So you can start now, and I'm going to put the music, and when the music finish, I'm going to put another music and going to show the Jamboard, so we can also all see the Jamboard at the same time together, okay? So let's see how this goes.
And remember, there are multiple boards, so as one gets filled, you can move to another, or just find an open board at the top of the tool. You can find that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Ben.
Sorry, no, could you please again repeat the steps?
So the steps are, we're going to have 10 minutes for the Jamboard. The 10 minutes are going to compose of a couple of minutes first for you to look for things you want to put in the altar, considering your own thinking through, your journaling around how your garden grows and what you've been taking from the summit. And then when you have those things, you go to the altar and you start putting them there, but you don't put them there randomly. You try to put them there playing with what the others are putting also. And that will be another 3 or 4 minutes. And then we'll still have a couple of like 3 or 4 minutes to see all of it together. And then we just don't do anything else. We just look at the screen, and I'm going to guide us through the different pages so that we can get a sense of the final result. Okay? So we can start now. I'm going to put the music, and yeah, hope you enjoy. Thank you so much. So, yeah, we would like to invite you all to go directly to breakout rooms in trios, and for the next 20 minutes, to just share what have emerged for you from, the journaling, from the Jamboard, and from looking at the question of how my garden grows within the context of this summit and of this stage 4 of seeding the future, looking at practices that can sustain us. Ben, are you ready to send everybody?
Yeah, the breakouts are set. I know Alex had said he was going to have to leave, so he's in a group of 4. Is there anyone else who's going to be leaving before 20 minutes? We can always adjust once we get in there.
All right.
You'll get a 1-minute warning. Use the final minute. Don't return. Just return automatically. And we'll see you back here in about 20 minutes.
Enjoy. Thank you. Thank you, you. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome back.
Welcome. I must confess, I was like, I always feel a bit bad about bringing everybody back, because like I imagine like how everybody's enjoying the small group conversations. But this time I was actually feeling good, because I was feeling so alone here in the main room and thinking like, what the hell are you talking? So the invitation is really not to report on the groups, as you know, but actually to ask, can we have a living conversation, a conversation where we feed on the person before us? So we kind of get into the conversation following a flow. It doesn't mean that you have to kind of build exactly on what the other person is bringing, but that you actually bring yourself in the conversation in the moment that you feel is the right moment to follow a flow and to nurture this reflection together around stage 4 and how our gardens grow, how we can sustain a life force in ourselves to continue this path. So yeah, the floor is open, and feel free to open your mic and jump in. No need to ask for authorization. This is our space and we are all collectively holding it. So
I wanted to say thank you for allowing me to come in somewhat late. I was teaching a course with Spring Cheng, who some of you know, on women's empowerment, and jumped out of that at its last moment of conclusion to join you, because this summit is important to me, and because I believe that gatherings like this have value based on what comes out of them, beyond the feel-good experience of coming together. And that I have a commitment, which I was thrilled to see was wholeheartedly shared by the people I was in the breakout group with, to embodied action, somatic awareness, alignment through the body, going forward into any action, and complete inclusion. That whatever action, whatever follow through manifests, that it come from an embodied place, and that it be inclusive, highly diverse, and I say that in the broadest sense. So those are values that are critical for me in this time of enormous transition.
And in that conversation, I'm just going to go ahead and riff off of this because it's the invitation. In that conversation, one of the things that I'm aware of now, and have been for a long time actually, is that the biggest barrier to embodiment is the trauma that we all carry based on our life experience in this particular paradigm that we've lived in, whether it's, no matter where we are, we're living in a paradigm that's traumatic. And to reconnect that circuitry of wisdom that is embodied means that we have to traverse. In my experience, I'm doing it myself and I'm aware of what I'm doing. I have to traverse that trauma and the effects of that trauma and grieve it fully and reintegrate those aspects of my being back into the intelligence that I bring to whatever it is I do.
With that, one of the things I've learned, or of the many things I've learned or pulled from the summit, is the value of softness and kindness in the process, not just for those who are hurting, but for ourselves, in order to, I don't know if it's stop the trauma or como just soften it, como se dice, water goes in and then there's something that, cuando lo filtras, filtered, in order to filter it, to just to soften it, to make it better, to have a better quality of pain and grief. I mean, the idea of being able to be sad collectively is just beautiful. I mean, it's not something that we would aim for, but it is what it is, and it's so much better to hold space for collective sadness than it is to not make room for individual sadness. So thank you very much. Nuno and Ben and Eva, I don't know if you're aware of what you've created. Thank you.
We've created. I just want to kind of signal that you brought water in, Tanya, because it feels like so great, because water actually encompasses things. It doesn't like expel things, right? If you throw something on the water, it will embrace it. It will and kind of pour out. So just wanted to acknowledge that.
I'd just like to add what you were saying about how to break through the pain. I remember reaching a point of letting go of a big family judgment that I'd been holding on to. It was a big moment in my life a few years ago. And then I went to a talk, a poetry reading, and it kind of brought in all the story of what England has done to so many different countries. This was particularly a Scottish story which I was unaware of at the time, and the pain. And I could feel my whole body just tighten back into that feeling of judgment and how I was going to deal with that. And then there was an Australian person, it opened up into a conversation, Australian person, and they talked about how the Aborigines they don't step into judgment, they just sit around and cry together, and they call it the sorry business, letting go of the sorry business, and they don't. And I was so great because I held on to it for maybe an hour, and then rather than holding on to it for the next 10 years, which I could have done, it just allowed me just to filter the idea. And you were saying about the water, the tears, just letting it filter all the way through and softening me back out of my judgment, because we can only let it go. We can't change history.
Yeah, so that brings me to this point of what is what has been, and primarily the willingness and the capacity to ease into it instead of fight it, or like trying to change it, trying to change either the history or, how do we ease into what is, then gives the impetus to make sense of the reality and also move forward. And one of the main things there for me is how do I stay receptive to whatever is emerging? And how do I stay authentic and spontaneous? So these are some of the things that keep coming back to me, and they've come back to me in a very big way in this past 3-4 weeks. So it's like constantly showing me the same mirror that has been put in front of me in so many ways at so many different points of times in my life. And I'm very grateful for that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'd like to take the opportunity to step in now because of what Vanita has just said, and thank you. Because this may not sound terribly popular, but I'm stuck in the middle of two places. And that is, on one side, I know I have to work more on inner work, on my heart, leading more with my heart, because I've led with my head for 40 years. So there's that part of me that says, take the time, take the attention, you're worth it. On the other hand, I've had the epiphany that we've only got so many years to make the right kinds of decisions to save the planet. So the urgency is pushing me on to say, don't dwell. There's a bit of history there, and what has been. And I certainly have not taken on the attitude that I'm responsible for what my forebears did anywhere. It's more about how I show up. And so I'm in this funny place between, one hand, recognizing that trauma has brought us here and therefore should at least be recognized. On the other hand, there's a path ahead of us and it's not waiting. So I don't know if that's making sense or clear, but it's a difference between my empathic self and my rational self. And it's that kind of dichotomy which I'm wrestling with.
I just want to step in and say this. It sounds, I want to say this in terms of the climate crisis and the things that we all are aware of. And that is that let's not forget all the agency that is carried by the earth and her beings, both in seen and unseen realms, the animals. We are not the sole solvers of this crisis. The earth has her own agency and she's working through us. So I think part of it for me is this exquisite time taking that's necessary to really listen to what the earth's agency is saying to us.
And I just want to add that the vehicle for that is the body.
But I would also like to add another thing that I think has been somehow quite visible in our conversations throughout the summit. On one side, like when thinking about, garden and what kind of manifests, there's also all these things around what we could call like the skeletons in our psyches, or like the traumas, the monsters, the things that we need to become more closely intimate with and befriend, so that we can kind of move forward from a different place. And I think one of the things that kind of invites me to notice is, and it has been quite strong for me because I can totally relate with what you are saying, Grant. I might not have been 40 years in that role, but I've been quite a long time already. And what happened to me is, in a certain moment, I start to see that all around me, there was these people, like all of us here, and people we know, we've been putting so much energy on trying to change things. And if you look today, we are in a worse place, or we are in many ways, from what we were 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So I don't think it's about doing more. And that mode of the hero's journey that kind of I hear you talking about, and it's has been part of my journey, I think it's coming to an end. So my question is, what if, could it be that working with the invisible world, working with this kind of place from where shape emerges, from where movement flows, you know, working with there perhaps is is going to, things will unfold the way they have to. We don't need to come and continue to put our energy in this kind of penetrating the world, you know, constantly to try to make it go in some direction. I think we are being invited to do a different movement. And I've been sensing in some of the conversations in the summit that has been emerging quite strongly in between us, that there's something else, and that's a mysterious place because we know little about it. We kind of sense we don't need to be, we cannot be with the heads going in there. We need to go fully with different parts of us. But it seems that it's the invitation we're being called to. So I'm kind of recalling this kind of myths of feminine myths, which are much more related with dissolution, with falling apart. Like if you see myths of feminine myths, is more like women start off as princesses, and things fall apart for them throughout their journey. So they are reminded of the abundance of life in different places, and that's not only about them, but we men, we are we have this journey of putting our energy, and you know, the hero's journey of putting our energy into the world. And I think perhaps something around this other way of being and of coming into life.
If I may take from there, I don't know if, Grant, if you want to say something. So for me, I feel that there is something that I cannot grasp, that I don't need to grasp, that is acting and that is holding us, and is an agency of change that is very present and it's very strong, and it's bringing. I mean, you can see it. It's happening. I think actually in my experience, which is just my own, things are in many ways better than they were 30 years ago. I was an environmental activist 30 years ago, and we were lost. I mean, there's so many people that just gave up. And now that's very different. There is the activism at the moment is just enormous, and things are changing. So I see that there are things happening in a direction that I find more to my liking. And for me, it's not about saving the earth. For me, it's about either saving people I care for, or organisms that I care for, or even just not leaving a mess if we disappear from this planet. So I don't know where that comes from anymore, but I do wake up almost every night with a sense of urgency that is just sometimes really breathtaking. And I am in a place where I think we don't have the luxury to choose this strategy or that strategy. We are incredibly diverse. We have so many different skills. My strategy now is all strategies. So we have to do the inner work. We have to do the interpersonal work. We have to do, it's not like, oh, I have to heal myself first and then everything's gonna come. No, that's just, we are enough people to collaborate and do all these things at the same time. And what can be more beautiful than that? Just co-creating something where we are being comfortable. So for me, it's just less or and more and just being inclusive. And there's something I heard recently that was really moving, and it kind of ties back to this sense of being able to share our grief. And it's something that a friend of mine said in the sense of ecological mourning more than anything else, that transforming our grief
only makes sense if there is an action coming out of it. If I'm going to transform my grief just to feel better myself, then for her at least, and I resonate with that, then nothing has really changed. So for her, transforming grief is the first step in action. And in that sense, I think, yeah, let's do it.
I somehow found myself wanting, Grant, I just want to say something to you because I was actually going to speak to you, if I may, unless you feel a need to speak first. What's come to me in these moments is this sense that you, Grant, are one who has expressed a conflict in the moment within. And I heard you express it in kind of two parts of you. It felt almost as if there was an internal war going on. I don't know whether I heard that accurately, but my sense in the moment is to ask you, is there anything that we as a group in this moment can do for you? And my purpose in asking it is, first of all, because I feel that question in me, but second, because I also have a sense of, it's as though you're the being invited to be our living conflict in the moment, if you're willing to speak and take that role, and maybe others of us can join you there. And I also want to invite you to say, no, I don't want the focus on me at this stage, if that's what you need.
No, but I mean, that was very sweet, Midi. Thank you. No, it wasn't a call for help or attention. It was, I probably wouldn't have said this a few weeks ago in a company like this, but the very fact that I said it was, you know, sharing exactly how I'm feeling. And I don't know who was on the call yesterday of that somatic practices around accountability. And I was there for all intents and purposes, and then I just left because I was just so jaded. But something had happened in the morning, and just a short story so you know where I'm coming from. We give leadership programs to companies around the world, and one was with the United Arab Emirates. Very, very, very smart people thinking about the strategy of 2070. And as I went into their breakout rooms, I sensed that it was all about movement forward, growth, progress. And so I started to ask them questions. Do you think things will change in the coming 20 to 30 or 40 years? And I left that meeting with this feeling that, you know, 2070, they'll all be dead. Or they'll have emigrated to somewhere which is cooler. So that's what I mean about the sense of urgency, is there are a number of things which are going to happen with or without us. And the question is, do we still have the time to move this oil tanker? Now that is what gets me up in the morning with a smile on my face, thinking there is still hope. And at the same time, I realize that I'm going to have to do it with a lot more compassion than I've done before, because I can't impose anything. I've got to let it evolve. And that's why I have this dichotomy.
Well, Vandana Shiva, Joanna Macy, and Jane Goodall are some of the women elders who say we have a little bit more time. And they are all proponents of that inner-outer climate being addressed simultaneously. They are already being addressed simultaneously, but the consciousness of the action that flows out of the inner climate transformation, because that's a different action than the action that comes from the head, from the rational mind. Vandana, Joanna, Jane Goodall, they are all speaking from a somatic place. They are all speaking from a passion they cannot deny. And that's what moves them forward. And that's how they know there's just a little time left. Just a little.
I wonder if this is what you're talking about, Grant, which has been the challenge for me all throughout the summit too. I think many of you have witnessed very patiently that inner struggle. And one of the, well, how do you call them, harvests that I take from this, or I harvest from the summit, is that there are people for everything. That perhaps the only thing that we truly would need to do is to agree on basic principles like nonviolence. You know? But aside from that, I mean, there's people healing conflicts from a spiritual point of view, then that's going to happen in a few hours. And perhaps you have a more, sorry, my English is escaping me today, a more rational or industrial way of looking at things, and more functional. And maybe someone else has, I think that the value of this and the wonder of this and the absolute awe for me of this is that there's all of us on the same screen at the same time talking about the same topic. And there's no one telling us that we can or cannot do certain things, or whatever feels comfortable with us. And perhaps our job is to find those of us who are more, because we feel more comfortable in the rational space, but can still flow to the other, and just get together and figure out how we're going to talk to all these other people. How are we going to address the business leaders? How are we going to address all these other people that are very difficultly opened to new ideas and that require rational minds? You know, they require a rational approach. They require a far more mainstream approach. And if you're willing and you're interested, it's I'd love to. I would love to, because it's been a personal challenge for a very long time. And I see that there are many of us in the summit that have similar concerns in regards to that specifically.
I just want to bring to our attention that we have more like 5 minutes for plenary. So because we want to shorten a bit the end of the session to give a bit of space for people who want to go to the laboratory conflict lab on food that is going to take place afterwards. So, and just to bring that, there was also some people who haven't spoken. It's not like we all need to speak, but just to kind of see, yeah, it would be great if we have some voices. I see Kalu there, and yeah, come please.
Okay, so for me, this work has been like really important and potent. It has a lot of potency. What's alive in me right now in terms of wanting to do this work and activism and hearing you guys, for me it's really important, again, not to remind myself when I'm overwhelmed by things that I think I should do, should be doing, what should I do, how should I approach this, is to remind myself that, number one, none of us, like, we really have no idea where we're going. Like, and that's the truth. Like, we don't know, and we are still here, showing ourselves with the best of the intentions that we have. So that gives me a lot of space, because it's like we are together in this, you know, in this boat. We're doing the best that we can with what we can, knowing that we have no idea, not even knowing if we have or don't have time. We don't know. Like a year ago, we didn't have any idea of this thing happening, right? Like COVID, like nobody saw it coming. So we really cannot foretell the future. So it's kind of like, that brings me to this space of a lot of humility, like, you know, like, okay, good. And still knowing that I'm going to show up, whatever the outcome is. So that's all I wanted to share today with all of you guys. Thanks.
I just share a tiny offering for whenever, which is that I can coach people on how to language things to travel across the different ways of knowing. So if anyone wants to explore that, that's a territory that I swim in and find really exciting, actually. Communication across languages, so to speak. So just please know that and reach out if you want to talk about it. Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
She's good at it too.
Wow.
So may I?
Vinita, please.
Yeah. So one of the things as I'm listening, and also which has been coming up for me, is that when we are finding new ways of doing things, we are moving into new possibilities, completely different way of understanding things and finding very different solutions. Very often we get stuck in the problems that we face in the way we do things now. We transport these problems into a new way of doing things and what we are trying to do in a new way, what we are trying to create new. And very often what happens is that these problems are because of the way we are doing things. And many times when first of all, these problems can't be solved in the same way with which these problems have been created. And when we find new ways of doing things, many of these problems don't have a place there, but somewhere we transport them into that system, and it creates another loop for us. And I find that if I can go into the new possibility completely in a blind way, not carrying anything from my old paradigm, sometimes it gives me a lot more freedom to experiment and create, as compared to if I carry a part of it into that space. And by saying that, I'm not saying that then we should forget the problems of the climate. These are our realities. Realities can't be forgotten. But still there is an element which can be left behind, and we very often carry those elements forward. And I don't know whether I'm being clear enough, but that's the thought which has been with me.
Thank you, Vinita. We need to close the plenary, and just a couple of things for me that emerged from this. I'm kind of sitting with this issue around maybe more than doing, that we're talking about different ways of being in the world and showing up and relating with ourselves and with each other. And so I'm sitting with the question of activism and doing and working for changes. Perhaps we need to work with being more delicate activists. And when I say delicate, I say it in the sense of meeting the world halfway, so that we kind of prevent ourselves from dropping down our own views and our own ways into the world, and to actually allow the world to manifest itself to us. And then we work with where it is, not where we want it to be or where we would like it to be. So I think is a dance, and I feel we are all dancing there. And I think we just need to maybe dance a bit better, continue to improve our skills and set and moves, so that we can enjoy. And occasionally we'll step with the feet and hurt a nail, or I broke a nail to my wife learning to dance tango. So I know how hard it can be, but yeah, we'll learn with that. So thank you so much for this. And yeah, I would like to invite Ben to kind of introduce us a bit with stage 5, and yeah, and then we're going to have some moment just for a bit of clarifications, questions before we close.
Sure. Yeah, stage 5, emerging pathways. So where are we headed from here? I don't know, the combination of the metaphors of a garden and cultivating the soil and being on a journey and moving. But maybe part of that journey is to recognize the whole planet as one super organism. And so the soil anywhere is part of the soil everywhere. And we're only journeying within ourselves, even as we are in those outer realms. Yeah, so it's a time, we have only a half a week this time around. We close on Wednesday. There are a few sessions on Monday and Tuesday, including 2 of them that are kind of along these lines of collective co-sensing and meaning making, and perhaps there's some kind of organizing that might happen there. We're not, we're still feeling into that. The first of those calls will be led by Bob Stilger of New Stories, also one of the guest speakers, and then Nunu and Eva and I will lead the second one on Tuesday, and then we're co-creating the closing ceremony. Some of you are already a part of that. There's a post on the online community about that too. There are a lot of questions coming up about what will remain of the resources that we have here. And certainly, as Nunu said, all of the website with all the videos will remain. And I think it's highly, highly likely that the online community will also continue as an active space in some form, or available to be that. The calendar is also certainly something that can continue to be there. But I think there's more that maybe has to evolve for us to understand how much of what we think of as coming down to earth continues versus how much this gets composted and becomes, nourishment for things that are following from here, and maybe with many of us still connected to one another. Yeah, so if people have questions, or if there's more you want to add, Nunu, to that description.
Yeah, I just want to strengthen this thing that you mentioned, that I mentioned in the beginning of the session, that it's been a growing feeling among us that it's like a bit of like the maestros dropping down the baton and just putting ourselves. We are all on the same place, and so what comes next is not up to me or Ben or Eva. It's up to all of us and to what we want to build with this, knowing that there's often this temptation to hold on to this particular thing. So I want to also emphasize what Ben says, that we already know that this is rippling off in many different ways, and we trust in that, because each one of us are making those ripples. So for instance, next week there's going to be an invitation from the Inner Resilience Network to invite all the North America people to meet together and reflect on how to move this work forward. There's more people having conversations around possible collaboration. So this is all amazing. This is all great. This is all beautiful, and we don't need to hold on to the summit, although we've designed it in a way that, and I just want to reinforce that the website, for sure, all the content is going to be there. All of you can use it. You can invite groups to make the journey, design and adapt the content in your own way, and use this and bring others on board. We just ask everybody to invite people to register on the website so that we can keep track of how many people are going through it, so that we can assess a bit that. And everything else is like, it's a field of possibilities. So we're going to hopefully engage all together next week on this reflection on what new beginnings are lying ahead.
I'll offer one more metaphorical reflection that another way to think about this is, this is a kind of a blossoming of mushrooms from the mycelial mat that already exists in the realms of people doing transformational work, and the networks and the groups and the organizations and the initiatives and all of it. And so mushrooms, are not meant to last, right? And they can have powerful effects, and they cast spores, billions of them all around. So I think these gatherings, I like to think of them that way. The mycelial mat, however, was there before and is much richer for what we've done and will continue. Questions?
I guess I'd just like to voice something that it may have been spoken to, but I don't think it's been spoken to in parts of the summit that I've been present at, which is that I have a sense that all of us came here with this sort of, we're all in some way in the same team, and we're all committed to birth something new. And maybe it will come up in Tada's session to come, but I have this sense that we haven't yet spoken our gratitude to modern society for having got us actually to the place we are today. I have this sense that if we want something to dissolve and let go, we have to be willing to feel very grateful to it for all the things that it's enabled with us, and have a kind of reverence for it and make a space for it to have had its day with grace. There's something there that is germinating, at least in me. Thank you.
Well, so there's a conflict lab on food just after this. So I'm going to invite you to just do one thing before we close. And that is that we build, well, that we kind of build a word cloud of how we are living this session today and kind of getting closer to the end of stage 4. So there's a link I put there that opens up, that I'll ask you to open up on your browser for the Mentimeter, and the invitation is that you write a few words, one on each of those boxes, about what are you feeling now as you are leaving this session and moving towards the last stage of the summit. What's alive in you? And let's do that for a couple of minutes. So you can write as many as you want. Okay, 8 people already filled it in. All right, keep going, and I'm going to share the screen to show the results. And you can please keep going until you finish. And so we can see that definitely connected is the most common word for most of us. And there's also gratitude, grateful, hopeful, love, feeling ready, tired, contemplative. Yeah. So let's open the mics, everybody, and say goodbye. See you later, or see you in 15 minutes for some of us.
See you in 15 minutes.
See you 50. I can't believe
You all.
If we don't see each other, see you. Have a great weekend.
Somebody order pizza.
Give me your address,
Thank you very
Dita,
much.
and I'll send you a lot of pizzas.
Yes.